Imagine this: you walk into a car dealership ready to check out some new rides, but instead of being treated like a valued customer, you're dismissed and told to leave. Sounds frustrating, right? But here's where the story takes a surprising turn. The man who was kicked out isn't just any regular customer, he's the new owner of the dealership. Yes, you heard that right. The man who was thrown out was actually about to take over the business. The manager, assuming he knows who belongs and who doesn't, reacts out of arrogance and prejudice, completely unaware of the truth. But what happens next will leave you stunned. In today's video, we're diving deep into this shocking story of assumptions, power, and a twist of fate. We'll uncover how this entire ordeal unfolded, the surprising revelation that followed, and what it says about prejudice in business. By the end, you'll see how an innocent mistake can turn into a career-ending moment, all because of an assumption. Stay with us till the end, because this story isn't just about one person being kicked out of a dealership. It's about the uncomfortable truths we often ignore, and how one man's moment of arrogance led to a life-changing revelation. You'll also learn why this story went viral, the impact it had on the dealership, and how you can avoid making the same mistakes. Trust me, this is one twist you won't want to miss. The dealership itself was what you'd expect from a typical high-end car lot. The polished floors gleamed under the bright showroom lights, and the air was filled with the scent of new leather and fresh paint. Luxury cars lined up their sleek exteriors, reflecting the sunlight that streamed through the large glass windows. It was the kind of place where on the surface everything seemed perfect, a place for the wealthy to stroll in and pick out their dream cars, or so it appeared. The employees, dressed sharply in suits and ties, walked around with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. They were used to dealing with high-profile clients and knew exactly how to cater to them, or so they thought. But there was a noticeable difference in the way they treated certain customers. It wasn't just about showing off the cars. It was the way they sized people up the moment they walked through the door. A raised eyebrow, a dismissive glance, these small gestures spoke volumes. The manager in particular had a reputation for being a little too comfortable in his position. He carried himself like someone who had it all figured out, confident that he could judge a person by their appearance. The staff followed suit, often ignoring or brushing off anyone who didn't fit their idea of a typical customer. It was a routine day at the dealership, customers browsing, employees going about their usual tasks, but there was an underlying sense of entitlement in the air. For the manager, this was another typical morning, ready to impress a potential buyer, or so he thought. As the minutes passed, he continued with his routine, paying little attention to the people around him, certain that nothing would disrupt the well-oiled machine of the dealership. After all, they were known for their exclusive clientele. Everything was business as usual. It was a quiet afternoon when the man walked in. He was dressed casually, but with a confidence that suggested he knew exactly what he was doing. He glanced around the showroom, admiring the cars, his eyes lingering on a few models that stood out. As he approached one of the luxury sedans, the manager, who had been chatting with a colleague, noticed him. The manager's gaze hardened almost immediately. There was something about the man's presence that seemed to trigger an automatic judgment. Without thinking, the manager stood up and made his way over, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He greeted the man, but the tone was off. It wasn't the friendly, helpful tone you'd expect when dealing with a potential customer. Instead, it felt forced, as if the manager was sizing him up, trying to figure out what he was doing there. The man politely asked about a car, but before he could finish his sentence, the manager's attitude shifted. The manager's smile faltered, and he quickly glanced at the man's clothes, then back at him, as if deciding he didn't belong. "Can I help you with something?" he asked, his voice a little too sharp. His words didn't feel welcoming, they felt like a challenge. The man, unfazed, nodded and asked again about the car, but the manager, now visibly irritated, brushed him off with a cold response. His eyes narrowed, as if questioning why this person dressed simply would even think of stepping foot into a high-end dealership like his. In that moment, it was clear that the manager's actions weren't about the car or the customer's questions. They were about assumptions. He didn't see a potential buyer. He saw a black man who in his eyes didn't fit the image of the kind of person who could afford to shop at his dealership. The manager's behavior became more dismissive with each passing moment, as if the mere presence of this man was a disruption to the usual order of things. What should have been a professional interaction was quickly turning into something far more uncomfortable. The tension in the air grew thicker as the manager's behavior shifted from dismissive to outright condescending. After a few more questions from the man about the car, the manager's patience seemed to run thin. His smile vanished, completely replaced by a look of annoyance. He glanced around the showroom as if hoping to spot a more suitable customer to engage with. The man, still calm and composed, was clearly trying to keep the interaction polite, but the manager was no longer interested in helping. With a sharp exhale, the manager took a step closer, his voice lowering to a cold, almost threatening tone. "I'm sorry, but this really isn't the place for you," he said, not even bothering to meet the man's eyes. He waved his hand dismissively, like shooing away an unwanted guest. "Maybe you should head to one of the other dealerships down the street. They might have more affordable options for someone like you." The words stung, but the man didn't flinch. He stood still, surprised by the abruptness of the request, but remained respectful. He tried to explain that he was genuinely interested in purchasing a car, but the manager wasn't having it. His eyes narrowed further, and his posture shifted. No, he was standing tall, as if to signal that his decision was final. "I said you need to leave," the manager repeated, his voice gaining edge. The room, once filled with the hum of casual conversations, now felt eerily quiet, the tension thickening with every second. The man, despite his polite insistence, was being forced out of a place he had every right to be. The manager's actions were no longer just rude, they were dismissive, even disrespectful, based on nothing more than his assumptions about the man's worth. The customer, still holding his composure, slowly turned to walk away, but there was a sense of injustice hanging in the air. His demeanor hadn't changed, he hadn't raised his voice or become confrontational, but as he walked toward the door, it was impossible to ignore the unfairness of the situation. The manager, oblivious to what he was about to lose, stood firm in his mistaken belief that the man didn't belong. As the man walked toward the door, the manager stood by, convinced he had made the right call. But before the door could fully close behind the customer, an unexpected voice broke the silence. It was the assistant, a younger employee, who had been watching the exchange from the side. She had been silent up until now, but her eyes widened as she quickly approached the manager, her voice filled with urgency. "Wait a minute, she started, but the manager cut her off, still smug in his certainty. "It's fine, just let him go," he muttered, brushing off the situation with a wave of his hand. "Some people just think they can waltz in here without knowing what they're doing." But the assistant wasn't having it. Her eyes darted toward the man still walking calmly outside, and then back at the manager. "You don't understand," she said, her voice now shaking slightly. "That man, he's the new owner. He just bought the dealership this morning." The manager froze, his blood running cold. His face drained of color as the words registered. "The new owner." He turned quickly, his eyes scanning the showroom as if looking for some kind of confirmation. The assistant was right. The man who he had just arrogantly kicked out was indeed the one who had sealed the deal earlier that day. He had signed the papers and taken ownership, something the manager was completely unaware of. The realization hit like a thunderclap. The manager's mouth went dry. His chest tightened as embarrassment washed over him in waves. He tried to speak, to offer some sort of explanation, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was stare at the door, now swinging shut, as the man who was about to be his boss walked away, completely unaware of the embarrassing mistake that had just been made in his own dealership. The assistant's eyes stayed locked on the manager, her expression one of disbelief. She had never seen him look so lost for words. The arrogance that had been so obvious in his attitude moments ago was gone, replaced with a mixture of shock and dread. The truth had come crashing down on him, and it was clear that in his rush to judge, he had not only humiliated the wrong person, but also sealed his own fate. The moment the truth sank in, the manager's mind raced, but his body stayed frozen in place. He stood there, his face flushed with embarrassment, trying to process the gravity of the situation. His stomach twisted, and his thoughts scrambled for an explanation, but nothing could make up for the mistake he had just made. The humiliation was immediate and crushing. How had he been so blind? How had he let his assumptions cloud his judgment so completely? The assistant, now clearly uncomfortable, remained silent, waiting for the manager to react. But he didn't. For a long moment, he just stared at the door, lost in his thoughts, unsure of what to do next. The dealership, a place he had worked at for years, was no longer his domain. He had been so certain, so sure of his place within the hierarchy. Yet now that certainty seemed fragile, like a house of cards ready to fall. It didn't take long for word to spread. The assistant had quickly relayed the incident to higher-ups within the company, and soon enough, the manager was called into a meeting with the dealership's owners. His once confident demeanor crumbled as he faced the reality of his actions. The owners were less than pleased, and his position was now on the line. His career at the dealership, which had seemed so secure just hours before, was suddenly in jeopardy. The company could not afford to have someone in charge who displayed such blatant prejudice. After all, a business like this thrives on customer relationships, and the manager had just thrown away the chance of ever building one with the new owner. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. In the end, the decision was made quickly. The manager was fired. The dealership couldn't risk the damage to its reputation or the trust of its customers. This incident served as a harsh reminder of the importance of fairness and respect in business. No matter who walks through the door, whether they appear wealthy or not, whether they fit the expected image or not, every customer deserves the same level of respect and professionalism. A single act of bias, no matter how small it may seem, can cost a business not only customers, but its entire reputation. The manager's failure to recognize this simple truth had cost him everything. This story isn't just about one bad encounter at a car dealership. It's a reflection of a much larger issue that affects people every day. Prejudice and assumptions can shape the way we treat others, often without us even realizing it. In this case, the manager's instant judgment was based solely on the man's appearances, clothes, his demeanor, and the assumption that someone who looked a certain way couldn't possibly afford a luxury car. It wasn't about his qualifications or his ability to make a purchase. It was about a preconceived idea that led to a harmful and unfair decision. These kinds of assumptions unfortunately happen all the time, not just in car dealerships, but in many areas of life. People make snap judgments about others based on race, gender, appearance, and background, often without considering the full picture. These biases might seem small in the moment, but they can have devastating consequences. Whether it's someone losing out on a job opportunity, not being taken seriously in a meeting, or in this case being kicked out of a business, the effects can be long-lasting. What makes this story so powerful is that it shows just how damaging these biases can be. The manager's assumptions didn't just hurt the customer, they hurt the business as well. A single thoughtless action had the potential to ruin the dealership's reputation and cost employees their jobs. It's a reminder that every person, no matter their appearance, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The damage caused by discrimination isn't just personnel, it can affect entire businesses, communities, and societies. This incident highlights the importance of being aware of our biases and challenging them, no matter how ingrained they may seem. We all have a responsibility to ensure that our decisions and actions are fair and considerate, regardless of someone's race, background, or appearance. In business and everyday life, treating others with respect and kindness should always be the standard, because the consequences of not doing so are far-reaching and often irreversible. This is a stark reminder that prejudice can have devastating consequences even in the most unexpected places. The manager's assumptions didn't just affect one individual, they affected an entire business, highlighting how biases can lead to missed opportunities and irreversible mistakes. It's essential that we all take a step back and think critically about our own biases. Whether in business or in daily life, the way we treat others speaks volumes about who we are as individuals and as a society. Let's strive for equality and respect in all areas of life, ensuring that every person, regardless of their race or appearance, is treated with fairness and dignity. Remember, the way we interact with others shapes the world around us. If you found this story impactful, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content. Let's work together to spread awareness and make a positive difference. This story is a work of fiction, and any resemblance to real persons living or dead or actual events is purely coincidental. The events and characters depicted in this video are created for entertainment and illustrative purposes only.